No problem.
Appreciate it so much.
Take care.
Bye. It's getting so dark out. My lighting is bad.
I know, that's what I have to. I have to put up an extra lamp. I have nice windows right here, but at night I have to put up an extra lamp.
It's not working well, but that's just the way it is.
So you had a busy week last week, Tim?
Oh, I had 4 different nights of town board meetings.
Oh wow, yeah. That was a few weeks ago. I had that I had 4 meetings in a row, and it was yeah.
And I've had 3 every week since we started.
Oh,
3 again next week. I'm getting kind of burnt out.
okay.
Plus, I have my job.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that side thing,
People
right?
kind of forget about.
Right.
But it is what it is.
Yep. Oops. I think
Thanks for putting all that stuff together and sending it out.
Yeah, and I got
Kind of
trickling. I
voluminous.
got another set of notes late last night. But it looked like that there was a flurry of emails going on, so there was lots of other information. I've been going through the site plan design guidelines that they just sent, and I've been providing some comments. But maybe I can kind of, we'll touch on that at some other point. People are showing up.
Hey, everybody.
Hello. It's always horrifying to see the video of yourself.
Especially when I didn't stop to have Renee cut my hair this week after all these weeks. I look like a porcupine.
Not too bad.
COVID porcupine.
I'm probably going to still be pretty passive because I'm still recovering from whatever this is. It was not COVID.
Good. That's good.
That's all we know.
Because if it is COVID, I'm not walking by your house for another 3 weeks.
It could be anything from Lyme to, I don't know, but.
Wow. How long have you been?
I'm sure I got the ticks within 24 hours.
Oh, you got a tick?
I got a couple, but I do every fall.
These deer are all over the place on our hillside. I don't understand. It's worse this year.
Whether they're deer or not, because they're little mice.
Yeah, they live in mice.
Yeah.
So good luck with the deer. Yeah.
The mice just call
I'm going to
them
buy a gun finally.
That's hard to
I'm gonna
use
become
on
a
mice.
hunter.
mice.
Hard to use on mice, for goodness sake.
Oh, you could totally obliterate them. Oh, this is recorded, sorry.
Yeah.
We're recording.
So Barbara, unfortunately, some of the literature seems to say that the 24 hours thing is not necessarily adequate, that it can be transmitted diseases quicker than 24 hours. It's
But I don't have, and I know a bullseye rash isn't necessary either.
Exactly.
And at first I thought, I did have some of the symptoms. Now I'm much less sure. So.
Yeah. Yep.
Give it a few days.
Yep.
We will wish it away. I will guarantee you that it will simply disappear.
Will you?
Excellent. Way to go, Tim. If you could do that with those, excuse me.
With what?
Reference deleted.
Never mind.
We are waiting for Ann and Rebecca. And I don't know if Bill's coming tonight or not. Bill's got his hands full trying to finalize the copy of the comprehensive plan. And so far, I see no members of the public. We're wearing them down.
Are we wearing ourselves down?
No idea. Last week I had 4 nights of town board.
Jesus.
This week I've had 3 nights of town board since we started somehow. It's just gotten crazy.
Well, thank you.
It's not what I signed up for.
No.
It was really easy at the beginning because I didn't know what I was doing. So I would just go a couple of times and vote yes. I'm going to try to start making lots of mistakes. That's what we do in Cornell administration. The more mistakes you make, the more likely they'll not ask you to come back.
I don't know.
But it never seems to work.
Yeah, that doesn't go with the Peter principle, does it?
Ken's here. So is this the 3rd?
4th meeting, I think.
No, I'm trying to, no, this is actually the 5th meeting.
Okay.
I'm just trying to remember Rebecca's schedule.
Oh.
It was 1 week.
I mean, frankly, at 5 after, I think we ought to start.
Maybe this is the week she can't come.
Might be.
I keep telling you, Ellen, that we work on French time here. You have to get used to it.
All right.
Get a glass of wine, sit back and relax, and then we will start. So we will now start. This is the official meeting of the Land Use and Economic Development Task Force. And we are Monday, October 12th. It appears that we have no public participants, so we don't need to pause for privilege of the floor. Maybe I can just open by, I mean, everybody sent in a lot of stuff, so thank you very much. It looks like the breakout groups worked well and were efficient. Maybe I can just open by asking Greg if he has anything to add. He was organizing things for everybody and sending stuff out. Is there anything pending, Greg, or?
No, not at this time. I was just taking a look at people's notes and the ones that came in today and was just making some comments on them, but we could talk about them further in the meeting.
Yeah. So what I thought we'd do tonight, if it's okay with everybody, is I thought it would be good for the entire group then to walk through the discussions that we had last week. Get a sense of our pulse to see if maybe there's any refinement that we want to engage in, cut and bait, etc. And maybe what we could do is begin with perhaps the formula business restrictions, and then maybe go to economic review and then end with design. Would that seem like a good strategy? Given that I think that design is probably the most immediately complex. And then as a result of our discussions, we can then have a chat about what direction we want to go from here. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Catherine, and Jonathan appears not to be here again. Indeed. And Jonathan wasn't here last week, and he was supposed to be doing formula business restrictions with us. So we ended up just having Catherine and then joined by Greg and myself, which was our committee, but we actually made we had a very, very substantive discussion. Catherine, would you be in the mood of kind of like summarizing what we did?
I can try.
Are you up to the task physically this week?
Oh yeah, my knee is still really messed up. I had knee surgery, and unfortunately it's not as healing. It's healing as quickly as I need it to heal, but
We don't like to hear
I'm
that.
just in my bedroom with it with ice on it, but I'm fine. Last week was just a enormously busy work week for me as well. So Greg and Tim, please interject if I don't
I
summarize.
didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Oh, it's okay. No. So like Tim said, I think we had a really good discussion, and we talked a lot about the actual, what a formula business was, and how it would fit into our town. And we really Greg summarized it very well in that, our defining it was basically their national or regional chains, for lack of a better word. Usually there's 10 or more, and the McDonald's, whatever, Walmart, the big ones. They have standardized goods and services, as he said, and then they also have their design of their stores, which they need a certain footprint. If we were to have one in our town, what their footprint and design would look like. Are these formula type businesses willing to meet those restrictions if we put them in place? And so what we came down to after we talked for a good hour or more, and we basically came down to that we would really need, probably for a true formula business like those mentioned, or smaller ones even, which I can't really come off the top of my head, we're probably not economically viable for such a business. We're not a hotbed of population that's going to make it viable. But also, so that led us to also that we think, like it said in the summary, I'm sorry, I'm reading the summary over again. It isn't, those type of businesses aren't really consistent with our type of town and what we would want in our town. And again, they probably wouldn't want to be in our town because it wouldn't be, how economically viable would it be for a Walmart or something smaller to be here?
I don't quite remember us coming to that conclusion.
We
Catherine.
did, but that's part of what I thought too. But formula businesses don't really fit into what the town, the comprehensive plan establishes as our unique rural presence. And I think that pretty much sums it up. And then when we came to the end, it was really that we probably needed to investigate basic zoning tools, or zoning, but very, very simple and basic, based on what Joan talked about. And as well as a lot of the restrictions, I believe we talked about it would fall under the design group, correct? Am I correct in that?
Well, maybe I can just flesh this out just a little
Yeah,
bit.
probably better, because you did put me on the spot
I
a
mean,
little bit. I wasn't really.
We reviewed and considered an awful lot of examples of formula business restrictions across the country. Almost all of the viable formula business restrictions happened first in much larger communities, with larger commercial business districts to compare and contrast to. But in all of them that we've been able to discover across the board fall within, we're embedded, sorry, allergies, we're embedded in zoning plans and laws. We were able to look at a couple of very complex legal challenges. And what's interesting, what I found to be interesting is most of the legal challenges that were then combated by the governments were in rather economically robust areas. For example, Malibu, California. And almost consistently, the legal challenges had to do with the zoning designations. Around the zoning designations, very little had to do with design and that sort of stuff. However, we were able to discover one town in Maine, I believe it was, wasn't it, Greg? Maine? I just don't have those notes in front of me. A smaller town of about 5,000 residents, so more comparable to us. They were actually able to kind of shoo away a smaller size formula business enterprise in relationship to their design guidelines. So they didn't shoo it away based on formula business restrictions, but the company never came back based upon the insistence that it conform to standardized design guidelines. It was still embedded in a zoning district, but it doesn't appear that that would be necessary in the first place. So if Greg, and Barb and Catherine, if I'm summarizing this right, so we then came to kind of a consensus that the legal challenges for sustaining formula business could, in the first place, it's unlikely that our town economically would be able to sustain that budget-wise. And frankly, I doubt the town board would want to go in that direction. But it looked very, very viable that well thought out design standards could end up doing a similar trick. On the other hand, we also realize that the development of even minimal zoning guidelines in the future would provide an additional template for the additional enforcement of such a thing as that in the future. So our conclusion was that it would be economical and strategic for at this point to put our money into design guidelines and then a recommendation for zoning. Is that, Greg, do you have anything? Is that roughly what we're talking about?
Switching gears here. Yeah, that sounds consistent.
Summarized much better than I did.
Sorry. Ellen.
So I have this is Barb. I have a question for the group. As you were looking into the the case studies and all that you looked at, did you find a minimum size, minimum square footage? The reason we're asking is that the review guidelines group or site review standards group is recommending that the square footage minimum that's listed currently in the site review law for the town, which has a certain minimum for industrial stuff and a certain minimum overall for site, requiring site review. We're recommending that this, the entire task force might consider recommending lowering those values. And so I'm just curious what you found in terms of, what a formula business size, typically is at the minimum.
Yeah, most of the formula business laws that I've been able to determine, I mean, they go in two shapes. Most of them are actually aimed at the Walmarts and stuff like that. So that can get up in the tens of thousands. And so it's not uncommon to see 20 to 30 to 40,000 square feet. I'm not sure, Greg, have you come across any lower than 10,000? I'm not sure that I did.
Oh, for specifically for formula business.
Formula business.
That is a good question.
Don't think so.
Yeah, so like I'm thinking, not a Walmart type of formula
Right.
business, but like a Starbucks, like a Starbucks, what would that seems like it would meet the formula business criteria, but, certainly the square footage of that is much lower than 25.
So my understanding is that like a Dunkin' Donuts or something like that, I think I read something like 2,500 square feet. Does that sound right, Greg?
Yeah. So like even Starbucks in very urban areas can be down to 1,500 square feet.
Oh, okay.
And a typical Dollar General, I think, was 7,500 square feet.
7,500 feet, yeah.
So if 10,000 square feet, which is what currently is in our site plan review law, yes, they'd come under it because of this 1 acre business, but that's kind of a backdoor entry. I think we better be looking at square footage.
Yep.
So in that, you know, certainly Starbucks wouldn't fall under it, Dunkin' Donuts wouldn't fall under it, Dollar General wouldn't fall under it. So I think if what I was hearing from the Formula Business Group is we shouldn't have a specific law trying to regulate formula business. Am I correct that that's what you guys were thinking?
It seemed to us that that might not be the most efficient way to proceed, partially because of the likelihood of our being potentially legally vulnerable based on precedent because of our lack of zoning. Doesn't mean we couldn't maybe win in court, but it would be expensive. And also the reality that there would be also, which I think was a less of a concern, but there would be resistance from a particular facet of the community that would prefer generic stuffs like that. But the real concern was I think
Challenge.
the lack of critical mass for such a thing on the one hand, and then the lack of legal confidence on the other.
So if I'm hearing correctly, if we are concerned about the uniformity of formula businesses detracting from our rural character, then what your subgroup was saying was we can address that through design standards.
At least some of it.
You can't have signs that are this big, you can't park in the front, you can't whatever. Then we would have to assure ourselves that the design standards would apply to those kinds of businesses. And right now, I don't think we can assure ourselves of that.
And the square footage seems to me to be less of a guarantee about anything in relationship to our current site plan review law, because all it is a trigger for review.
Well, what I'm saying though is if you were smaller than that and not disturbing more than 1 acre, you wouldn't get a review at all.
Yeah, I know. I agree with you.
Design standards wouldn't
Yes.
apply to you. So I think we want to be careful that if that's what we're using as our handle,
Mhm.
that it is going to address the kinds of businesses and looks that we want to deal with.
Yeah, and it would seem reasonable to considering what minimal square footage would be appropriate in this regard.
And I
Absolutely.
think I had perhaps asked Greg to look at typical square footage, and maybe he did, of the kinds of businesses. Because frankly, I think a Dunkin' Donuts coming to town should have to abide by the design standards we have. I don't think we want a typical Dunkin' Donuts with, and one of the things that I've seen some places is any drive-through business with banks and pharmacies perhaps being exempted would have to go through a design review. And I would think, frankly, I would like a pharmacy too. I don't want a typical Walgreens. It's fine if we have some Walgreens, but let's not let them look like, let's make them have to abide by design standards. I'll shut up.
No, and when we were looking at the formula business restrictions, I mean, most of them covered these kinds of issues, but really in relationship to design standards. And there also is kind of interesting because most of the towns that have formula business restrictions have them in 2 different categories. One for, I guess, dry goods or something like that, and another for food. They almost always had completely separate laws regarding formula business food for some reason. And that a lot of that I might have had to do with the drive-bys, drive-throughs. Michelle?
Well, I'm just wondering how difficult would it be for us to change that square footage requirement in our site review plans and our design standards?
don't think it'd be difficult at all.
Okay, which I guess you probably noticed. We all in this group, we agreed that rather than calling them design guidelines, they should be called design standards.
Mhm.
So square footage is another thing we talked about. Anyway, I'll let Ellen go through it. Say more.
Could you, in the site plan review law, call out not only a certain square footage, not only an acre or more of, to trigger a review, could you have formula business trigger a review?
Interesting question, Greg.
Yeah, and I had touched on this at our last meeting. That was one of my very first questions about a month or so ago, is that could the site plan review define formula business and then just say if it meets that criteria, you have to go through review. Again, we're kind of going on, pretty uncharted territory, it seems. So, my thinking is I don't see why not. And even Joan last week did talk about, as long as the biggest thing is as long as you define the issue well and then propose how to mitigate that issue. As long as the law isn't being discriminatory, then it might be appropriate. I still think this idea of a formula business restriction in a place like Caroline, just given the kind of what we're talking about, just might need a little bit more solid legal foundation, because I'm not comfortable to say that all we need to do is just define a formula business in the site plan review law, and then if it hits that, then they have to go on a certain path. It seems like that could work, but again, it would just, I want to hear that from someone who's gone to court with these kind of things, or so that's my thought.
Can we put that on the list for our attorney? I mean, that seems like a very fundamental question that Guy Crow ought to be asked to think about.
Yasmin, did I see your hand up?
Yeah. So I want to repeat the Ellen question, right? Do we need only one measurement, only the square footage, or do we need to have another measurement? So based on our finding, I see the Rotterdam model is so good. I mean, well, I agree with the Rotterdam model because the Rotterdam model use multiple measurement in order to trigger a review or investigation, something like that. So maybe it's not the economic review part yet, but actually the Rotterdam model has at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 type of measurement. One is the square footage, the other is the height of the building, and the employment, the additional employment will be generated, and maybe also the dwelling unit of housing, and even the use of sewer flows. I mean, the generation of sewer flow is in excess of 15,000 gallons per day, something like that. So multiple measurement that can trigger. So the business who will come to our town will need to consider a lot of things.
One of the things that we did talk about in relationship to formula business was that, I mean, one, we're not likely in Caroline to attract large scale formula business because we don't have water. So there are certain things that are going to maybe preserve us a little bit. But the other side of that, Yasmin, is that the formula businesses of a lower scale that we were talking about would fall under almost all those thresholds. They employ like 2 people.
Right. Below those thresholds.
They have these very careful formulas where generally I think what they've done is they've gone across the country and found out what averages they can use that will fall underneath review thresholds. So it's just something to take into consideration for us. Michelle?
I thought one of the readings we had in the first week said that you couldn't say that a particular kind of retail couldn't come into, that's discrimination against. So how can you say that you can't allow formula businesses? Doesn't that fall into that discrimination thing?
It would have to be all formula businesses of any kind.
Oh, I thought it would have to be like all retail, or, you know what I mean? The type, like retail or food or,
Well, you
you know
could,
what I mean?
so these, I mean, as I mentioned, the laws that we are looking at did tend to break down into two categories, food on the one hand and other stuff on the other. I think they were just called formula business though, and then the food was called food.
Okay.
But they all basically were the same laws as I read them, right, Greg? Whether it was food or business.
What's the interstate commerce thing you have to worry about? I think Greg mentioned it one week.
Yeah. So, Michelle, if I understand correctly, you're asking that how can we define out these formula businesses from a regular restaurant use or regular retail use?
Right, right. How can you reject them just because they're formula businesses
Yes.
and not, they don't fall in with like your town plan or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, in other words, you can't say Brooklands Market can be in one spot, but if a formula business wanted to be in that same spot, you couldn't say no just because they're a formula business, is how I read one of those things.
And
they were
that's
talking about how they went. I'm sorry, go ahead.
that's where it's important to ask the lawyer. I mean, this is a fundamental legal question. You know, we can say our own interpretations, but it's a legal issue.
And I think, just to be clear, I think that's one of the things the Formula Business Group said, and that's perhaps why they wanted to see it under the design standards. And we're not saying you're banning formula business, but we might be trying to say any formula business has to fall under the site plan review law. So I don't think that would be so discriminatory. I don't know.
And the issue of the, I don't believe that on the face of it, it's discriminatory in and of itself to ban formula businesses. It's discriminatory to single out particular formula businesses within that category. I don't think it's discriminatory to ban formula businesses and not ban local mom and pop businesses, but everything that we've been able to find so far, all of the precedents are then buried within commercial business districts that do that.
Tim, just to interject here, there was a reading that we had early on that did say it was discriminatory to ban external to the community businesses of whatever sort if you were letting similar type businesses that are locally owned exist. And that's where I think it really is a legal question.
Yes. And that could have, Barb, also had to do with multiple local businesses of the same type, you know, et cetera, et cetera. If you had like a regional drugstore, for example, I think that was what that was referring to, right? And I think what we'll do legally is sooner than later, once we have some refinement of where we're likely to go, then I think that'll be the time to ask GEICRO just to meet with us for some of these clarifications. Any other questions or comments, just formula businessy? Do you tend to agree as a group with our evaluation that this in and of itself might not be the best way to go for us in Caroline, especially given the challenge of responding to legal precedents? We could conceivably win in court, but probably we would go to court.
Yeah, I agree with and understand the premise of not trying to have a formula business restriction per se, standalone formula business restriction, but it does seem like understanding how a formula business can be defined, what the parameters are that are associated with the formula business, and then understanding how that then fits within what triggers in the site review law, and what that triggers in the site review guide or standards that we're talking about, that relates to formula business parameters, criteria, description, whatever. That seems appropriate to me. So in essence, the tools are the site plan law and the site plan review standards, but we may want to include in their language that relates to formula business.
As a trigger.
I think
Right.
that's well put.
And that well could be, I mean, it's hard to believe how that could be problematic in and of itself, because it's not a restriction. It's just to come to the table. You have to come to the table.
Yeah.
In that,
Greg?
I just want to follow up on that. Barbara, I like that distinction of, and sort of your analysis on that. In any zoning ordinance, and I had referenced Lansing zoning ordinance at one point a few weeks ago, it's very common to not just say retail and restaurant. I know in the beginning of our discussions, and maybe Michelle, this is what you were thinking I was saying when I kept saying retail is retail is retail. That is true, although I can maybe clarify that a little further, that places often will say retail for wholesale goods, and then retail for not wholesale, essentially, and those can be in their own separate districts, so they have their own types of restrictions. And so going off what Barbara I think is suggesting is that, and what Ellen has alluded to, that can we just define formula business in that site plan review law, or elsewhere, and then that is a trigger for a set of other kind of design or other sort of standards that the town might want to explore.
And the trigger, Greg, that you're referring to then would be that they have to come to the table and address, say, design guidelines, right?
Yeah, and we've been just talking about that maybe that would be for, well, this is something for the group to consider. Is it just for businesses that meet that definition, if that is legally allowed to pass, or is it for all? Is it based on a size trigger? Is it based on a other element type of trigger?
And I think just given the discussions we've had in the review standards subcommittee, that we would want both. That formula business would be included, yes, but also things that meet an acreage size minimum or a square footage size minimum would also trigger the site plan review guidelines or standards.
Ken, I see you have your blue hand raised. I've been paying attention to real hands tonight.
Thank you.
Let me find my blue hand.
I'm agreeing with what you're saying, that if we can not have to do zoning, but we can put into effect in the guidelines of in site review plan, have any business that wants, or industry that wants to come to Caroline. Obviously, depending on its size, most things that might come here would be smaller, I would assume. I don't see Walmart moving into Caroline. One of the things that comes to mind for me is a difference between regulations that you want to make and restrictions that you want to make. And when I read on page 13 that we should explore and enact guidelines and formula business regulations. I like that. And that seems to be what we're talking about. But then 35 in the actions talk about restrictions. And I wish in our plan that we would change restrictions, if it does even fall in other places, to regulations. When I hear people start talking about restrictions, oh, we're going to restrict this one, restrict that one, but we'll let this one come in. I feel we want regulations for all of them that want to come in, and if they're going to meet them, then they get to come in. If they're not going to meet those regulations, then they won't come in. And maybe I'm wrong between a distinction between regulations and restrictions.
Fair point. But I do want to add that our group also recommended looking into zoning as well, which is a separate, longer term consideration. Based on all of the laws that we're reviewing, where almost every planning guideline with teeth was embedded in some kind of a zoning tool. Right, Greg? Is that the proper way to put that?
Generally, yes.
Such a politician. Would this be a good time to, I mean, it sounds to me like am I getting just a consensus from the group that the group might not feel that it's economical to spend time formulating formula business restrictions per se, but shifting our attention into these other areas?
I agree, this is Barb. I agree with that generally, but I think it could be useful to have somebody working on a definition for what a formula business is, so that we could incorporate that into other tools, other language tools that we might wish to be using.
Good idea.
So when we did, before we met for the Formula Business Working Group, there was that really long chart that most of the businesses were in California. There was a couple in Florida, like Sanibel Island or Sanibel or whatever. And they really buttoned down formula businesses, particularly, I mean, they had hardcore zoning, like they allowed formula businesses in a certain strip, but it wasn't in this really defined historic area that had all the one-off, very unique businesses. And they buttoned it down. One of them, I believe, was down to 5. If there were 5 or more of these types of businesses via in the entire United States or some area, and it had X amount of square feet, whatever, they were like locked out of this little town. And Sanibel Island rings a bell with me because I've been there, and there is not any type of there isn't even a Ben and Jerry's in that little town, because there was more than 5 nationally or something like that. So I mean, that just using that little case study would be something if we wanted to be super restrictive and also put a square footage on it. I mean, I think, Barbara, that would probably be something that could be explored. I think, Greg and Tim, what do you think about that based on the other case studies we looked at?
I mean, I think that those case studies were also empowered by particular zoning districts. But it wouldn't be that big of a heavy lift for us to come up with a definition of formula businesses. I mean, there are a lot of precedents for that, and I don't see that to be a major challenge, and we could certainly easily, I think very easily do that without much more research than we've already done, because there are a number of already precedents that delineate that for us. Right, Greg?
Yeah, that's a good summation of that. And Catherine, that there are a number of other types of laws that sort of restrict the number of the type of business, and then often when one leaves or something, that there might be like a quota that the town gives. But I think to Tim's point, it's maybe working just more on a definition if that's the route that the group decides to recommend.
Okay, let's just do a shift over to economic review, since these are on somewhat parallel planes. Rebecca, did you want to take the lead? Oh, Rebecca's not here.
Here.
Who would like to take the lead on the economic impact review?
I feel a little bit spacey still, but just wanted to say that, economic impact review is not really, should not necessarily be the same as site plan review has to do with the site, and an economic development review has to do with the economic impact of a business coming in, whether positive or negative. And I think we ended up as a group last week with a lot more questions, as you see in Greg's note, than answers. I think some of the questions we had were about thresholds and triggers, just as they would be for the site plan review. One of my particular questions about formula businesses is their employment practices. Now, if you have a Dunkin' Donuts and they have three employees max, does our development plan care whether these people who are hired are going to be living wage employees? Do we care whether they're getting benefits or whether the community, the town, the county, the state are going to have to fill in the gap because they're not getting the wages they might otherwise get? There are questions about competition with existing businesses, and I don't know. To me, it's a very open question whether competition can be a reason for restriction. It could be a reason, it could be a trigger for demanding an economic impact assessment. And of course, there are the positive things. Who's the population that's going to be served? Do we need to have a drugstore in the town of Caroline? Do we need a bank branch in the town of Caroline? It might be a good idea to have one, even if they're formula businesses. Who needs them? Where should they be? These are the kinds of questions that we talked a lot about. We resolved very little, except that the Rotterdam study was helpful in that it did use some of these issues as questions to be answered in a review.
Ken, you have something to add?
Well, one of the things you were asking about a definition of the formula business, I had put a conglomeration of different ones together at once. I don't know if anybody got that.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't get it. I'm not saying it was great, but I thought it was a start.
Mm-hmm. I believe we sent it out to the group.
And as far as, well, I hope they read it anyway. Some of the things economic wise, like the Rotterdam one, I think it was had professionals do an assessment, and it was going to cost tens of thousands of dollars, I think. It might not have been the Rotterdam one, but one of them that I looked at, but we had a list of questions in that, of a lot of different things, more questions than answers, I guess. And, but of something that eventually shows that business trying to come here, if it's a bank, we don't, our assessment shouldn't be, will the bank be profitable? Will Starbucks be profitable? That's not, how will it work in our community? What benefits will it provide for our community? And what is the community going to have to provide to them, like, I don't know, garbage takeaway, garbage collection, things like that, that say, okay, wait a minute, our community is going to pay out more than what they're providing. They're providing some property tax, and they obviously have some sales tax that goes to the county, and eventually we get some of it. But if and like Barbara here says, if the employees are, that's fine that they got a job, but if they aren't getting paid well enough, I don't know if we can control that, but that's kind of a negative then.
In
So
your,
I think go ahead.
In your research, did you come across differentiations between requiring economic impact review for some and not for others? I'm thinking, let's say in terms of living wage. We're talking about being concerned about living wage for, let's say, formula businesses. Wouldn't we then have to be worried about the same thing for local businesses as well? Did that come up?
That it came up, and it is a question that was raised. Yeah, I think if I were a lawyer, I would raise that. Yet I do think that it's, in terms of the development vision embodied in the plan, and in terms of just cost to the town, it's probably worth considering.
Excuse me?
Yes. So yeah, I love to read the report about the Trumansburg case, right? It's not, that's not the commercial business. The Trumansburg case is just a residential development, but they have economic impact review and very, very detailed, including the additional labor and so on, and also the effect on healthcare, something like that. So I've just imagined if I, the Walmart owner, and I want to enter Caroline. Oh no, maybe Walmart is too big. I don't know, CVS or something like that, drugs. So or dollar store, something like that. What is the step? So I believe that the economic impact review is the first door to enter the town, because the economic impact review is the decision-making tools to weigh whether this is like give more benefit to the town or give more cost to the town. So if the owner of the business pass this test, and then they can go to the next step, to the formula business review and site plan guideline or something like that. So yeah, you have to be in the position of the business owner. Something. If I want to build something in town of Caroline, what is the step that I will go through? And the first gate is economic impact. After the passing the compatibility test of the comprehensive plan, we have 3 categories there, right? livability, environmental protection, and rural character. If this is passed, there's no change whatsoever with the business, then it can go to economic impact review. And then the question is only, are this business will give benefit or cost? And Trumansburg study is really, really detailed. They give really, really thorough detail. And then about the number, I think maybe we just give to the planner, because I think Greg as a planner knows, you know, the number, the value of every element of screening or something like that. So yeah, and I just using the Rotterdam model just to finish my notes here. Thank you.
Michelle?
Well, yeah, it occurred to me that when we first started looking at this stuff, that the economic review was a really good tool. And in addition to, you know, the site plan review and following design standards, but and it's clear to me what would trigger, you know, the site plan review and the design standards, but what would trigger, and I'm just asking because I have no idea, what would trigger the economic review? Like, is it the number of employees? Is it I don't know. What would it be?
Can be many. In my notes, it can be many. Just as I mentioned in reference to the Rotterdam study, can be a size of the business, the footage, can be a height of the building, and then maybe other factor. We can you know, add it up, something like that.
Did your group come across economic impact reviews outside of zoning?
I don't think so. Yeah, we haven't discussed it because we believe that we refer to the Joan statement, right? Actually, town of Caroline need a stronger land use control. Traditionally, we use zoning. But zoning is a long-term product, so we can build something that much simple. As I quote her, that we don't need a hammer to kill a flea. So maybe much simpler than that
You
way.
don't need a hammer to kill the fly on your gray head?
So your white head. But it seems to me that just as you have a site plan review, you could have an economic development review instrument, a law that is separate from a zoning ordinance, and that instrument would have to include a set of, again, triggers and thresholds. One measure that I keep thinking about, and I don't know if it would work at all, is some relationship between the size of the footprint and the economic benefit in terms of either local jobs created or service to the community, whatever, taxes.
Mm-hmm. Ellen?
The design standards group included, in what we will look at together, the development must minimize adverse impacts on existing businesses located in the town and should support the town's continued economic viability. And we also included one that says the impact of the development on the town budget must be assessed and determined not to have a negative impact. So we did include some things that had to do with the economics, and that would be triggered by the site plan review law. So a business or entity that came under the site plan review law. And so it doesn't seem impossible to me that the design standards could include, flesh those out a little bit more and could include the kind of reviews that you're talking about. What would be the impact on employment? Personally, I'm very interested in the idea that businesses should pay a living wage, and I'm unclear how and whether that could be addressed in any of our laws. I think it's a very interesting idea. But I guess what I'm saying is maybe it doesn't have to be a separate law. Maybe under the design standards, we could flesh out some economic analysis.
And for the economic impact review, I'm wondering within this broader context that both Ellen and Barbara are talking about, whether you came across information about cost, thresholds for cost of the review, who pays, what you would use to trigger that. One of the things that I remember reading cautioning about economic impact review is the prohibitive cost for small businesses, for potentially incoming small businesses that a town like Caroline would probably want to be cautious about. Did that come up at all? Maybe not. Michelle?
Well, I don't know if this is the right place to bring this up. We also we generated kind of a list of things that we hoped could be addressed, right? Like say, that don't seem to be addressed by either the site review plan or design, and things like, billboards, whether they're acceptable, how big, whatever. And another one of those items was the idea that a business would have to create an escrow account to cover the town expenses if, like, say, they abandoned their building. And we weren't sure where that would, but I wonder if that would go into the economic review, if that's where you would find that kind of thing, and how you would require that.
Question.
Well, anyway, we thought, I mean, I didn't get a chance to write up the list of questions we had, but that's one of our questions, and I think it's a good consideration that, an obligation to put on any business that's coming into town, that they're not going to cost us more money by abandoning their building.
I agree with Michelle. It's really important. I lived in Tarrytown when the Ford plant went under.
Thank God we don't have a Ford plant. But the same thing could pertain to solar fields as well.
Mhm.
And it is, I believe that the planning board is going to turn to solar right away after it delivers the comprehensive plan, because we have an impending project.
Greg, has Greg had any experience with any, local communities, county level government towns that include something like that, where it's stipulated that a development has to put in escrow or something, to guard against that abandonment, the cost of abandonment?
Yeah, thank you. The only place that I've seen it in the local communities here are for solar fields, and that because often they are put on prime agricultural land, and so towns are starting to incorporate language about if and when they are abandoned for whatever reason, that they have to be reverted back to their original state. But in terms of maybe a business, I haven't seen that. Maybe someplace like Ithaca might, but I could look into that. It seems that it might be done in a place with a little bit more kind of an urban population.
For solar fields, what is the mechanism? Where is that specified in legislation or in?
Yes, so either in a zoning ordinance, which is often what communities will put it into, or communities just might do it as a local law. So a lot of the solar laws are just as local laws.
Thank you.
And I have come across a lot of examples of this, but when I was doing research this summer, but it was all in larger urban communities that have very intricate zoning and mechanisms for enforcement and that sort of. So it seems like it is common on that scale. Ellen?
Speaking to the concern of cost for doing an economic impact analysis, I would think that if it's a small business, the requirement will not be so large and difficult, right? You're a small market, you want to sell farm products or whatever it is, you're going to employ 3 people. You're really not competing with anybody much. I would assume a small report would be doable. And so I kind of feel like it might take care of itself in terms of cost. And if a larger business comes into town and they want to do something, I think asking them to do a study that would say, well, if you are serving foods and selling this and that, and it's going to have be in competition with the Dandy Mart or whatever else, to ask them to do something that costs money doesn't seem like a bad idea. So I'm kind of wondering if it doesn't take care of itself a bit by virtue of the scale of what is coming in. I don't know.
I agree.
I think part of the challenge is that an economic impact review usually has some standardized questions that have to be answered. And producing all of that information, no matter if the information is limited in scope, is still costly, because an individual coming in to do a small mom and pop development may not have the skill set to be able to do an environmental impact review and to produce the information. So I think we have to be sensitive that there is going to be a cost involved, most likely, in having to hire a consultant or having to engage somebody to actually conduct and write the economic impact review or assessment.
But Barb, that'll be true of a lot of the design standard questions as well, right?
Sure. It's just something I think to keep in mind. I'm not saying that that's something that guides us to not do an environmental impact review, but I just think we need to be aware that there are costs involved in asking anyone to answer a variety of standards or guidelines or questions, or do an impact review.
And that's where I think the question of what triggers the site plan review is important. If it's a mom and pop thing, I don't know, how big is the Brookton's Market? I don't know. And I think I asked that, but so if we get an idea of a size, would Brookton's Market trigger? And I'm not sure whether it should or it shouldn't, I don't know. I think it would be helpful to us to understand where we set those triggers for that site plan review and recognize that, yes, there will be some costs associated with that.
So Tim, just for the understanding of this group, is there some way to find out what the square footage of Brookton's Market is? Because we kind of know what that is. And so if we knew what the square footage was of that, it could just help us conceptually.
I could probably ask them.
Yeah.
I don't know who them is. So.
Isn't it available in the tax records, for goodness sake?
Probably.
So
I don't know, because it's maybe the building. I don't know. I just don't know.
I would say
Yeah.
we would like to get that for a few things with which we are familiar. I would like to know the Dandy Mart. I would like to know Brookton's Mart. I gather there's a general store of some kind in Speedsville with which I'm not familiar. But I think And maybe there are a few others, but that shouldn't be terribly difficult homework. As I say, I think the assessor's office has
Right.
those data.
This is square footage.
Mhm.
Yeah, we can try to get that. It can't be, well, who knows? I mean, my hunch is it would be about 2,000 square feet, probably 15 to 2,000 square feet, but I just don't know. But anyway, we can find that. We can get that information. And they give it to us anyway, because they're nice community members.
But
Isn't it?
I think the Dandy Mart is relevant because it, on the basis of square footage, I doubt would be triggered if we even lowered the site plan review law to probably even to 3,000 square feet. I'm not sure it would trigger the Dandy Mart. And I think we would want to review something like the Dandy Mart. And it would come under probably the formula business. Maybe we also, just thinking out loud here, maybe also pumping of gas should
Sure.
trigger it for us.
For the paved area.
I mean, I think pumping of gas probably is triggered by environmental impact review.
Yeah.
To begin with.
But if you look at the sort of paved,
Right.
what's paved relative to the market area, that,
And you know, those of you who've remembered the Dandy Mini Mart going up, that when the Dandy Mini Mart was originally built, there was a house right next door. After it had opened, they bought the house, tore it down, and expanded the parking lot
mhm.
and built a fence. And my recollection is the fence was the compromise for building the parking lot.
But one more thing, when you said the pumping of gas would trigger an environmental review, that would be at state level?
I don't know.
Because our environmental review would only get triggered if there was a site plan review law, if it came under site plan review.
Well, I think probably also it wouldn't necessarily entail disturbing more than an acre of land in order to have that, I'm assuming, but you're right. It's an open question. And I know that another gasoline company has been nosing around the town, so it could be inevitable that someday there will be another gas station. Greg?
Just a couple of things. Yeah, so the environmental impact review would get triggered, and I think, Ellen, maybe you're familiar with that being on the site plan review board, that there are certain triggers for the state environmental quality. So not all developments have to go through, well, they have to go through some form of the environmental quality review, but typically, if they're pretty small, they're just considered a negative there's a negative declaration issued by the lead agency. That's a whole separate issue, but so certain developments do get triggered, do trigger more environmental review. And when we start talking about the design guideline group, I did notice something in the design guideline comments or edits that you had made about an environmental impact statement, but that's getting into the weeds here. So I'll just, we keep that for that discussion. The other thing, I did just do a quick measurement of Brookton and of Dandy Mini Mart, and it looks like the Brookton market roughly on average, roughly 2,400 square feet. And then the Dandy Mini Mart looks to be about 4,000 square feet. But the tax assessor, so you would just need to contact Tompkins County assessor, and they should be able to get back to you pretty quick on those building areas. Because with Brookton, it's different. There's the commercial piece, and then I think somebody lives above it.
Yes.
So it probably has some sort of different tax assessment. That's it.
I think Mark Whitmer put in the chat that he can get that information from the town clerk.
Go, Mark, go.
Well, my question is, do these assessments include the paved areas around them and the parking areas?
No, it should just be building.
But I think it should include the parking areas and the paved areas around them, don't you think?
What there might be, so often with tax records, it'll show there's different columns of assessments. So it might be I wish I had a spreadsheet up right now because I look at these actually all day long, but they're like land value, then it says improved land value, which does include more possibly than just the building. And then there's just a few different types of assessments that properties will get.
But yeah, I mean, for our own purposes, I think we would want to know as a town, you know, you can have a tiny little building and this gigantic parking lot, right? We don't care about the square footage of the building. We care about the whole piece, really. So I'd be curious to know what those pieces are for Dandy and for Brooklands Market. Not just the buildings, the whole space, their paved space they're occupying.
Yeah, so to some degree, that's why in like the current town site review requirements, there's an acreage-based minimum as well as a square footage-based minimum. So, you know, Brooklands Market is clearly less than an acre. I don't offhand know what Dandy Mart is because I don't know what their footprint is, but those would be two useful measures to know if indeed they're retrievable from the town clerk and the town tax records.
And it's also true that the Brookton Market parking lot is not paved. So it has a lower environmental impact than the Dandy Mart, which is paved. So the paved area, I think, is a useful thing for us to be concerned about. And also, you know, jobs per paved acreage. That if you have an enterprise that creates a lot of jobs on a small footprint, a lot of good jobs on a small footprint, well, that might be good for the town. But something, a business that has 1 or 2 employees yet has a huge parking lot and a huge footprint is less good.
Am I getting the sense that the Economic Impact Review Group would like to continue refining this area and considering recommendations if we were to think about how to move ahead?
I think we need to move ahead on this, but maybe in conjunction with the site review, if, as Ellen says, it would be reasonable to combine, then the question is how far would it be reasonable to combine? Are there separate issues that might need a separate instrument?
I mean, I'm hearing a lot of separate issues that would need to be articulated and defined in relationship to, if you're going to talk about living wage, if you're going to talk about number of people to square footage, if you're going to be talking about economic impact on local businesses. I mean, it just sounds to me like there's a lot of stuff that would need to be refined by continued research and discussion by this particular group before, even if or if not, melding it into design. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, and I think, Greg, we might need help with examples if you know of good ones for us. We would appreciate it.
Sure, yeah, I certainly can. But I want to make a couple of comments just based on the discussion so far. So currently, right now, we've talked about that the town has the site plan review law, and it certain developments that are over 10,000 square feet or that disturb an acre go through the site plan review. And I think everyone's aware by now, but I just want to be sure that the other pieces that we're talking about, such as an economic impact review law, as well as, you know, another enhanced design guidelines, those 3 things don't have to be triggered by the same trigger, don't have to all be part of the same trigger. Okay, everyone's sort of aware of that. That they can, there can be different branches of these developments, and in terms of the review process. That okay, so there's a development that might meet site plan review, and it meets the need to go through these enhanced design guidelines, but it does not need to go through an economic impact review. And I think everyone is aware that they can be parsed out such as that, and maybe that's not the interest of the task force, that they do want to be kind of married together, but they certainly can be sort of split up in terms of their what triggers what, essentially. And
By passing them as separate laws, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And then also, I think the economic impact review subgroup is aware of this too, and through your research and through all the questions that you've posed, that this is a very big topic, and not that should scare sort of us off, but from what I understand is that there would need to be a baseline market analysis that the town would have to go through in order to establish a law such as this, because there's no, it doesn't seem possible, at least given our time, to come up with all these different types of criteria. Even just talking about, there's a lot of questions so far, and I apologize, I'm not sort of coordinating this or describing this maybe well, but what is the appropriate number of employees for X type of business, and is that a benefit to town or a negative? I don't know how to answer that question, and I don't know if anybody here knows how to answer those questions. This is an entire industry in and of itself, is doing an economic impact review. Yeah. Firms are hired to do these things for a town, and so before a town could even consider, I think, a law about this, there needs to be proof of what the baseline market is in the town, and what it can absorb. These are which is a little bit more versed in sort of economic kind of language, but these are getting beyond planning a little bit. So anyway, just to circle back to Barbara, your question, yes, I can certainly find you more examples of places that have adopted economic impact review laws. Mm-hmm. But I'm just wondering how much of if you think that would be a help, certainly, just to be able to formulate questions that you might have, or formulate sort of topics that you want to research more into Caroline. But this really should be, I think, for somebody, or it seems that somebody's a little more experienced.
So if I hear you correctly, Greg, you're saying that before the town board would consider an economic impact review law, we would need ourselves to conduct a survey to establish baseline conditions on which to base such a law.
Yeah, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know what baseline are we talking about here. It's one thing, we've been talking about, is the size of a building, can that be modified? And we've established, yes, it can be, and Joan confirmed that, and I think the lawyer would as well. That can be tied to a clear goal in the comprehensive plan. I believe about, we don't, the town doesn't want these like some large big box store. But when you start to get into these sort of economic types of thresholds and what is a benefit versus what is a cost on a town, I certainly don't have the qualifications to be making those judgments.
And a judgment would have to be made in order to have a law that stands upon it. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah, that's understandable.
And the judgment would ultimately have to do with the comprehensive plan, right? But I think, Greg, you're right that there should be some kind of baseline economic information that the town of Caroline has, what is needed, what is lacking.
We don't, the town, the town is so small that the town has never done that.
Right.
Can I interrupt and
Yes,
say I'm getting nervous? It's already 24 after 8 and we haven't gotten to the design standards
I think
because
we
they
need
were
to-
the hardest ones.
right.
Well, let me conclude with a suggestion that maybe somebody writing an MRP thesis at Cornell might like to work on this. Maybe a couple of people.
That sounds like a long-term project.
It's a long term, but it could be a cheap one.
Well, I think that what I would recommend for right now, because I do agree that we need to keep moving, is I think it would be helpful for the Economic Impact Review Group, which seems to be really fairly passionate about this, to meet again and put together some, I'd say, smaller cohesive recommendations that
Okay.
we could then mull over to decide then if the investment, even to set standards and guidelines and baselines, would match. But I think you'd like to do a little bit more work, right?
Yeah.
Because you love doing this work.
And maybe they could actually come up with a list of questions that they would want to ask a business. How
Yeah.
many employees, what, those kinds of things. Then we can think about if we can put them somewhere.
Yeah, that's actually what I meant to suggest. Thank you. Okay, with the meat of the issue obviously is going to be design, whatever we call it. And so let's shift gears. Ellen, would you like to lead this, I guess?
I would actually turn it over to Barb,
Barb,
if you're
okay.
willing, Barb.
Yeah.
You sent out the revised,
Oh, great.
is that okay?
Sure. I just had
Aye.
asterisk on my piece of paper. So.
Yeah, thanks. So before I get into the document that we sent just ahead of the meeting, just to reiterate that one of the recommendations that we have coming out of our subcommittee is that the task force as a whole wrestle with the notion of minimum square footage for the different kinds of things that are listed in the site plan review law of 2018. So I think that requires this entire task force looking at that with some of the issues that we've talked about before, but let's just not lose sight of that. So what we did was to take a look at the current site plan review guidelines, which are stated as a series of 25 or so questions that the review board wrestles with when it gets a project that is triggered by the site plan review law. So the first major recommendation that we're making is that instead of calling these guidelines, that we call them standards. And so what we did was to take the 24 or so questions that are in the current review guidelines and reword them as standards. And we talked about standards, including, excuse me, including language that would be something like shall, thou shall do something, or thou should do something, or thou will do something, or thou must do something. And we found, Googling different legal advice, that actually the language of must is the most legally defensible and holds entities to abide by that. So therefore, we've changed this into, through most of it, instead of questions, the language of must. And so I don't know that we have time to go through all 26 or so of these things, but that's essentially what we've done. And so there are a few things that we need to do a little bit more research on. So for example, one of the standards, the rewritten standards, refers to critical environmental areas and unique natural areas, and avoiding, you must avoid detrimental impacts on those things. We need to do a little research and see what exactly the county posts about what the unique natural areas are, and so on. We also have some standards that relate to, for example, avoiding impacts on prime agricultural soils versus trying to minimize negative impact on significant agricultural soils. So again, we need to do a little bit of research to see what is mapped and so on in terms of prime agricultural soils versus significant agricultural land. So, still some, more research has to be done, but that's the direction that we're going in. So I'm going to leave it at that high level and see if Ellen or Michelle want to add anything in, and then we can decide how to use the time that we have left. So Ellen, why don't you jump in here?
Well put, and I think what we'd like is for each of you to read through those, which Barb sent just before this meeting, and see whether you can live with or agree with, the development must do such and such. But that's the direction we went, because the guidelines are, as Tim put it, mushy and written as, they'll do their best to do this or that, or they'll look at this particular issue, or does the development address this, does not give enough teeth to the review board to be able to say, you can't do that. We can say, have you looked at this? What have you done to address this? And we did have that long discussion with Guy Crow saying, well, maybe if you think they could have done better, you could, say no. But it's pretty mushy. And so for us, changing things to must was important. And we do also asked Bill Padulka to look at the 25 guidelines that existed and see whether there were issues in the comprehensive plan as it's currently being revised that were not addressed in those 25. And so he did point out a few other areas that he felt the guidelines/standards should address. So we tried to put a couple of things in there that would address those. I hope we did. We wrestled with, we also, for homework for us, we wanted to go back through the Dryden guidelines/standards. Some of the Dryden stuff is please do this, and some of it is you shall do that. We wanted to look through those because we realized there were certain things that we hadn't yet put in, like the parking should be behind the building, and nothing we did really looked at sign issues. And I think we want to look at sign issues. So I think we are taking it upon ourselves to do that homework to see if we can add stuff. There are going to be some things that are difficult. So Barb mentioned that we were interested in unique areas, critical areas, and we had talked about wildlife habitat questions. And I did, Barb, have time between our meeting and this meeting to find out that critical environmental areas are set by the DEC, and there's one in Tompkins County. There are none in Caroline. So that isn't going to help us at all. I did also correspond with a person who's very familiar with birding stuff. And I said, are there any mapped areas that are bird habitat? And she said Audubon does, but there's only one in Tompkins County, and it's not where we are. She also said that there was there's a birding sort of atlas for Tompkins County. And I asked if she would be willing to look at the areas in Caroline that are recommended birding spots, because maybe that would be a handle for us. So we're looking at those things. There are questions that I'm sure you will have, but I think we're making pretty good progress. And I really think the issue is going to be that people are comfortable with must. That's what we're trying to do. And when Barbara was saying that the trigger for who has to do site plan review and therefore who has to abide by these standards, we've said it's 10,000 square foot in acreage or 25,000 square feet, I think, for a industrial. But now we're talking maybe we could add formula business as a trigger. I think that would be a very good trigger. I think we should add gas station as a trigger. Even though there may be a seeker review, that doesn't necessarily mean they would be subject to these kinds of design standards. So I think we need to look at triggers and look at the must statements and see how you feel about that. And we'll do some more homework on what's missing as we see it. How about you, Michelle?
No, I think you covered everything. We did talk about the billboard thing. Yeah, I'd like to look more into that critically, like the wildlife areas, because there are areas, I feel like, what about those wetlands further down by Flatiron? And so I feel sure that wetland areas have to be considered critical areas for birding. Anyway, I think we could do a little, even though they're not officially recognized by the county, I guess I would like to do more research on that. That's the only thing I would add.
Well, I believe the DEC does. I mean, the wetlands do fall under the DEC's parameters. Like I know that the wetlands along Thomas Road fall within DEC. So acknowledged wetlands certainly would require seeker reviews, I would say.
Yeah, wetlands specifically have state and federal laws that guide their protection. It's more the upland areas or meadow areas that or hedgerows that provide particular habitat that aren't regulated otherwise by federal or state law. So and don't fall under the truly unique county level natural areas designation. So we have to wrestle with that language and see if there's something acceptable that we can come up with.
I'm wondering if Steve Kress could be helpful, at least with the birds, because he lives here.
I think that's a really good idea. I think I will be happy to correspond with Steve about it.
Yeah.
And get him involved in that. How do we define it? I think that's a great idea.
Did you guys also have a chance to look at the Danby guidelines or whatever they're called?
Actually, it was, I think Joan last week suggested the Dryden guidelines would be the best to look at. And so that's on our list of things to do for this week.
Yeah, because my sense is the Danby, I felt were a little bit more specific. And glancing quickly at what you send in around 6, I think that they'll be helpful. They'll kind of match.
Yeah, we can look at both Dryden and Danby. Yeah.
And the Danby is not that long either. It's compact.
I'd be happy to. We'll be happy to do that.
I think that'll be helpful. Ellen?
So, if and when we finish with the discussion of the design guidelines, I'd like to bring up another issue. So
Tim, if I could suggest, if we're thinking about agenda items for next week, it might be useful to put as one of the early items on the agenda a discussion of what we've sent around tonight.
Yep.
To address, certainly don't consider this final by any means, but it would be useful to get some sense of the task force members' level of comfort with the must language approach, the standards approach, rather than questions, which is the current set of guidelines. And also, you might, Tim, after you read through this, you might want to, allow enough time to actually go through it point by point for all 26 points and see if there, if any of those merit discussion, because you believe they might be contentious. So, I think that might be a good use of this task force's time.
No, we certainly will want to do that. Absolutely. Would we want to discuss any of that tonight, such as the must? I mean, the must might be a very quick conversation.
The only thing I would say
I've had a
is,
chance to look at it and stuff. I don't want anybody to feel pressured into doing
Right. Thanks. Yeah.
and I think you can look at it philosophically, but it probably makes more sense to look at it fairly specifically.
Yeah. Yep. I
Because there
understand.
may be some of these where must is a good thing and some where somebody says, how can you possibly?
Great. So what I recommend that we do next week is front load the design discussion and ask the economic development group to continue to refine their thinking. And what I suggest for the formula business group is that it might be helpful for us to start to shift our attention to just start looking into various broad scale zoning options, which would be a different kind of recommendation to the town board for future action. But if we were to do that, I think we'd want some general sense of the kinds of things that we'd recommend: scale, minimalism, et cetera, et cetera. So does that sound like a good way to keep going? Ellen?
It does to me, but I would also ask the formula business group to come up with a definition.
Oh,
I
sure.
know we have lots, but to come up with one so that if we plug it into the site plan
Absolutely.
review law, we know what it
Absolutely,
would say.
yeah. Sorry, I just forgot to mention that. Of course, we'll do that. Yes.
I think that sounds
I
great.
think we can do that pretty readily, especially since Ken's done a lot of the work already. Thank you, Ken.
The other thing I would like us to begin thinking about is Michelle mentioned, billboards. There are probably some other issues that wouldn't necessarily fall under site plan review, that don't have to do with the subjects that we've been currently discussing, but which we might want the town to be addressing. So, for example, I think billboards are a problem. I think they're very distracting for drivers. They're very ugly. I can't imagine they bring anything very good to the town. They don't bring in particular money, I don't think. So my own view is we ought to be looking at some kind of an ordinance that has to do with billboards. I don't know whether we think that falls under our purview or not. I know that the town has considered, or there's been some discussion about junkyards. I don't know whether we want to be addressing that issue. So I guess what I'm kind of throwing out is, are there things other than the kinds of things we've currently been talking about in this group that we at least want to put on the radar in some way?
Well, I, for one, having to live extremely close to someone who is, for one, it's a danger. There's little kids who live right next door to a establishment that has way more than 3 unregistered vehicles and is now just a dumping zone for garbage and appliances and all that. I would love to see some type of regulation as far as junk and garbage and the danger of it. But that's just personal, because I think it's terrible that these 6 little kids have to live next door to a hazardous environment, and that people have to look at it, and that it's frankly even allowed. But that's just me. So when you say junkyards, what constitutes a junkyard? What needs a fence? My hometown, my brother actually runs a junkyard, and a machine shop, and he has very strict regulations on what he has to do and how high his fence is and how clean his place has to be. And it would be interesting to see that, but you know, I don't know. Is that on the table for this? I didn't really know it would be.
Can I just suggest, since, I mean, this is an old passion of mine, but I mean, I think that it would be well within our purview to make recommendations to the town board to consider particular other areas in the immediate future. But I think we have so much work to do that I'd like to keep us focused on the task at hand, recognizing that it, I mean, I think it makes total sense for us to start compiling a laundry list of needy action items that may or may not be addressed by the comprehensive plan. And as a basis of our conversation, certainly to deliver those to the town board for their consideration. But on the other hand, I'm still very much hoping that we can give them a concrete document, at least in relationship to design standards that might be able to be ready for adoption soon after passage of the comprehensive plan, which probably is now looking like it will happen. My hunch is in early December. So then if there were design standards, that would be probably happen in January or something. I'm just thinking, you know, broadly in terms of how the review for the comprehensive plan is moving along. Does that make sense, Ellen?
It does, and I just went over to the comp plan, and it does include a recommendation that the planning board will research current law considering public nuisance junk noise.
And a lot of that also is, we're about to hire a new code enforcement officer. And there are things that fall within that officer's purview, particularly regarding habitable structures and that sort of thing. And there is a junk car law. I should know all of this by heart because I worked on it for so long, but I now can't remember if it's a local law or county law. But there's a minimum number of junk cars that you can have that are unlicensed on your property, and I think it's 3. And that the difficulty in some of this stuff is who enforces it. So who has to enforce it is basically the sheriff. And some of these things then get to be low priority, but we've been dealing with these for years. Frankly, we got 2 of them cleaned up on either side of my house now maybe 10 years ago. I mean, I think that there were 45 total junk cars on either side of my house. And that did get addressed. So there are ways to do it. It's just cumbersome. But all of these things, I think now's the time when the town board will have been done with the comprehensive plan. A new fiscal year will start. And it's an excellent time to pile on more action items. And maybe some of the other town board members will take them on. Barb.
Yeah, just Tim, a question for you, given your comments about the comprehensive plan probably being adopted in December. Is there anything that's going on with the reviews and discussion of the draft comprehensive plan that this group should be aware of that would impinge on or influence the directions that we're taking?
So far, I don't think so. Most of the public commentary has just been for refinement. I mean, some of it in relationship to, say, a refinement of what's in there for public health and safety services. Some refinement, I think, in relationship to solar and things like that. Energy independence. No, so far as I can recall, it's too bad that Bill's not here, but I don't think there was anything significant in relationship to planning. We certainly received, they certainly received a little bit of pushback in relationship to the inclusion of the zoning word as an option, but frankly, there wasn't that much pushback. And they received a lot of feedback endorsing that kind of experiment. But I don't think for what we're doing, there have been any changes that would hinder or help us. Off the top of my head, I can ask Bill, but I'm pretty sure that that's the case. And particularly in relationship to the charge that we received from the town board, nothing has changed. And it probably won't change. I mean, that language is all pretty standard in the plan. And I'd be surprised. I mean, when we have the second public hearing, that could always change some things, you know. That we'll be apprised of that when that will be done by the town board once the town board receives the comprehensive plan from the planning board. Then, you know, the other contingency in relationship to this is the moratorium. And I would assume that if everything got slowed down for one reason or another, like the comprehensive plan got slowed down and it was imminent, it could be reasonable for the town board then to consider expanding the moratorium, etc. But that hasn't been discussed, you know, particularly by the board. But certainly from our point of view, I mean, if we were really on to refining some stuff and we needed a little bit more time, I would think that you could ask the town board, you could recommend to the town board that they take that into consideration. But we might not be there. I mean, you guys are so efficient, it's just remarkable. So I'm pretty confident that even in another month, we're going to have something pretty concrete to recommend. And by that time, everybody's going to be pretty tired of doing this as well. One of the things that, while we're on the topic of the planning board, I just might mention that we're going to be really trying to recruit for 2 open spots on the planning board. And it would be fabulous if somebody from this group, you know, caught the bug and was really interested. It's actually not as taxing as being on this task force because it only meets once a month. and it won't be doing the new comprehensive plan, but it is going to be tackling the solar field law and also a town telecommunications plan into the near future. I think that those are the priorities. Ken,
Yeah, thanks. In our group there, I think Greg kind of hit upon it. And just to state it from my point of view, we had about 8 categories, mostly all questions, this, that, or the other. And I'm not sure what you want us to do with those questions. Just formalize them into sentences, more than just a couple of words, or because I feel like we don't have a case to answer any of the questions. We don't have you know, a Starbucks to know how much tax they might provide the town, which is one of our questions. How many employees they might need. So almost all these questions, from my point of view, need to have a case in which to answer the questions. These are the questions that we felt ought to be asked to who's ever coming in. So I'm not sure what our task is now. And that's what I felt Greg was trying to say. And then one other thing, when this is answered, I want to just go back to above number 4 on the sheets we just got tonight on the 4th meeting. So if I could go back to that for 1 second after, if you can answer my question first, I guess.
Yeah,
I'm not
thanks.
sure
Thanks, Ken. I think, that's a good question. I just responded to that. I think it was Barbara Lynch just said that she was interested in just a little bit more reading on it, and I could certainly just dig up other examples of these types of laws being adopted by municipalities. But then I just did give that context that it seems to be just a much larger endeavor for the town to consider. I'm certainly not recommending against it by any means. It would take some significant effort by the town, I think, to establish a baseline. So to answer your question about what do you recommend, or what do I recommend for homework then with that in mind? Well, I could give that some more thought, unless, perhaps we table it. I don't know. I kind of want to hear from the group in terms of the consensus.
Can I make a recommendation? Just thinking about this a little bit more. It seems to me that a lot of subsequent pursuit of economic impact review might be contingent or related to the kinds of specifics that are agreed upon for site plan review. And I'm wondering if it just might not be helpful for us this week to pause on all the other stuff and everybody dig into the documents that were sent to us on site plan review. Then after we go through them next week, we can return to what spurs we then want to pursue in relationship to that. Because, clearly this is going to take us an entire meeting to walk through even the suggestions that were made this week. As a result of not one meeting, but two meetings.
Yes, and I don't see how without an examples we answer the questions, but those could be the questions somehow put into site plan review that may partially be the threshold that says, oh, we need to look at this business because it wants to be on this street. That's a town street. What kind of traffic? Whereas, oh, this other business is going to be on the state highway. Great, let the state pay for any problems there are there. That's what I say. So I agree with you to leave it for now.
I think we should leave it for now.
Well, but to leave this question for now, I agree, and work on the guidelines. Then
Before you
Alan.
leave that, the only thing I would suggest is when you review the design standards guidelines, that you guys who've been looking at this economic impact analysis and all those questions, that maybe you take the couple of places where we've mentioned some economic analysis and just flesh that out a little bit. Just a bunch of bullets that would say, ask them how many employees they're going to have, ask them, a few of the questions that you've come up with. Because it sounds to me like you've done more thinking than I have about those questions, and just put them in there. Then we can at least discuss those questions in that way.
All right, I'm for that.
And Ken,
The
you had something
one
else?
thing that I wanted to go back to, yes, on the paragraph above number 4 on the notes of the fourth meeting that we had, it said that I brought up that fire districts assess property. Fire districts don't assess property, okay? I don't believe I said it that way. Somebody took it wrong. But they use the full value of assessment to do their rate per thousand on.
Right.
Whereas they could vote to do their taxing on the ag assessment that a farm has instead of full assessment. And so I just wanted to make that clear. They don't do any of the assessing. They just tax on a different, my county taxes are on agricultural assessment. The firemen could do that if they would vote together to put the tax on ag assessment, but they don't. And I figured it out for when the planning board had a meeting, and for Catherine, oh, it's only $1.50 or whatever, $1.70, whatever. I said, well, for me, I figured it out. It's $140 that I wouldn't have to pay in taxes for the fire.
Right. So
They
and by the
still
way,
can have their full budget.
I apologize to everyone. The first thing I should have done
Go ahead.
at the beginning of the meeting was to ask if we were good with the minutes, and we will do that next week.
Yeah, Ken, I'll amend that. Sorry about that. There was no video recording of last week's meeting, so I did have to go off my very, very quick notes so I'll amend those and just send them back out. Thank you.
Wow, we've done a lot of work
Thank
again
you.
tonight. Thank you very, very much, everybody. So I think that's our plan. Is next week we're going to dig into the design recommendations that were sent to us. Right, yeah, Ellen?
I just have to ask if there was significance. There was a
Yeah.
fly buzzing around here, and I discovered it drowned in my wine glass.
I'm not going to touch that.
I'm not going to touch the rest of the
If
wine.
any of you saw Saturday Night Live, I'm certainly not going to touch it. Great meeting. So we'll dig in. If you have
Good way to end.
more on the Danby that you just want to share, that's fine. Otherwise, I think we have plenty to do next week.
Can I ask Michelle and Barbara and I to stay on for a minute so we can set a next meeting?
Excellent. Everybody else is good?
Yeah.
Great group.
Yeah,
And
so
leave my
whoever's
eye because I have-
whoever's the host, don't end the meeting.
I'm the host. I will not end the meeting. Maybe I'll go find a fly.
Well, I'll say good night.
All right.
Good night.
Good
Thank
night,
you,
everybody.
Appreciate it very much.
Everybody.
Great
Good night.
group.
Bye.
I am going to go get a wine glass.
I'll
As we
send
all-
you my fly. So when shall we three meet again? And how do we want to divide up any homework?
It seems like we need to look at the Dryden plan and the Danby, the guidelines, the Dryden guidelines and the Danby guidelines.
And
as
research the birds.
Yeah, research the birds. So as long as it can wait until this weekend, I'm happy to look at either the Dryden or the Danby guidelines. You know, I can take one of those if somebody will take the other one.
Well, I can take one because Ellen, were you going to talk to Steve Kress?
So if you're up for this, I would pursue the birds wildlife thing.
Okay.
And I would also pursue, is there a map of significant views?
And also the maps of the agricultural soils.
So that we have.
Oh, okay.
Well, I have the map, but I would actually like to pursue what were the criteria that were used, because I did send out to the whole group, I think, the significant soil, what
Okay.
did they call it? Farmland of statewide significance is what they call it.
Okay.
So we have that map, and we have the prime agricultural soils on the same map.
Okay.
But I would like to pursue what are the criteria, because
Okay.
maybe we could winnow it down a little bit. So I'll pursue significant views, I'll pursue bird habitat, and I will pursue, what did I just say? The farmland.
I have that you'll pursue criteria for prime agricultural soil.
Well,
that right?
actually for soils of statewide significance. But anyway,
Okay.
the same idea,
So
farmland.
how about Ellen, if I suggest this, how about Ellen, if you take a look at the document, we prepared tonight and sent out, and just take a look at all the things that had questions, you know, that we need more information on X, Y, and Z. And if you can handle that,
Okay.
I'll then take a look at the Dryden plan, and Michelle can take a look at the Danby plan.
Okay.
And then we can, yeah, circulate all our comments.
And one other thing I had started to do, but I haven't succeeded in doing, was talking to the Dryden planner. His name is Ray, and I'm forgetting his last name. I thought it might be useful to have a conversation with him, and Barbara, maybe you would do that, to find out how it's working for them. You know, you have these standards and guidelines. How's it actually playing out? Are you finding it the tool you need, et cetera? And I had talked to Danby, to the town supervisor, about it, and basically it seemed like it was so new and they lost their planner, and it just, I wasn't getting anywhere. But Ray has been with the town of Dryden quite a while.
Do you have contact information that you could?
I have been emailing with him, so
Okay.
I'll send you his email.
Okay, all right. And I won't be able to do that until next week, though. I'll just be upfront with that, because I'm still
Having fun.
travel status and enjoying myself on the shores of Lake Michigan.
Maybe then I should pursue that, because I
Okay.
think it would be useful to know ahead of time
Okay,
before we say this is the way to go. Okay,
okay.
I'll set up a meeting with him. Unless, Michelle, you would like to do that.
I don't care. I feel like you've got kind of a lot on your plate, Ellen. On the other hand, have you met this person?
Yes, I do know him a bit, so maybe that's the,
Well, do you want me to look at the bird habitat significant views and stuff like that?
you know Steve Kress?
I do know him, actually.
Great. So I can tell
But
you.
I mean, my son used to do some yard work for him, but
Well, actually, I don't mind. I mean, you could try to contact Ray in Dryden.
okay, I'll contact Ray. How about that?
Okay.
Will you send me one of your emails?
I will.
Okay.
I'll introduce you to that way.
Okay.
I think that sounds good. You know, we did not do any design standards that addressed signage, but I'm hoping either Danby or Dryden has done that. And we
Okay.
didn't address lighting except for saying, have you abided by dark skies? But that's not the full complement of what we might want to be thinking about with lighting.
Yeah, I think there are components in the Danby and or Dryden
I think so too.
guidelines that we can draw from.
And I guess I'm not really sure where we're going to how we're going to come to a decision about the square footage. That still seems like it's up in the air.
Yeah, I don't know that that's our decision particularly. I
Okay.
think that's the whole group. And I think
Okay.
if we get data about the Danby Mart and the, you know, what other things, that'll help. And Michelle, when you were talking about paved area, I think you're absolutely right that that's of critical importance, but that's not something for which you're going to get data from the
The tax map, right?
No.
Right. No.
But I think, as various people pointed out, at least that would be something that would be a trigger.
Yeah.
Because we're going to be disturbing that amount of acreage.
Yeah.
You know, regarding the square footage, I think that's something that Greg can research in terms of, you know, what the lower parameters would be, because there are going to be other
Yep.
examples that we can use.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I do feel pretty strongly that I hope we can include formula business as something that would automatically get to site plan review, because frankly, I think there could well be formula businesses falling under a 5,000 square foot trigger, and we would want to address that. That's my view. So we'll see.
So are we, so I think what we're looking for then is, you know, another set of revisions to the document. And then do you, Ellen and Michelle, want to try to get together Monday afternoon again?
Yeah.
So Barb, you're sort of saying that's the soonest you could get together.
Well, the weekend is the soonest I can get to actually working with the Dryden review things and, you know, and figuring that out in terms of revisions.
I mean, I'd kind of like us to be able to send out something revised to the committee before Monday afternoon. So I'm wondering if we could all meet sometime over the weekend.
That I don't know. I can't commit to a weekend time at this point. Sorry about that.
I understand.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll set up a meeting for whenever. I don't have anything planned on Monday. It was a little bit rushed today, I thought, but just tell me what time you want to have a meeting and I'll send out a Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, I can meet Monday morning. I just can't commit to something for the weekend at this point.
Okay. How's Monday morning for you, Ellen?
So actually, let's just talk a minute. One possibility as well would be that Michelle and I could make some potential revisions based on the research we do.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And not have Barb's contribution until after that.
That's
As I say, I'm just feeling like it's not really fair to the committee to slam them with something significantly different. And maybe it's not going to be that different. I'm not sure where we're at. So let me look at Monday. Monday morning looks good until about 11.
Oh, I was just gonna, I was gonna say I should probably not do it until after 11 because my daughter-in-law is teaching, and so I'm a little worried about our bandwidth. I don't want to impinge on her bandwidth when she's teaching a class. How about Ellen? How about you and I meet on Sunday, and then Barbara, what's a good time for you on Monday? The three of us can meet on Monday. Is that too many for you, Ellen?
No, it's all right.
Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we say, why don't we set 11 if that works for you, Michelle, on Monday? Okay. But let me know when you're meeting on Sunday, and if I'm able to join you, I will. I just at this point predict what my availability is.
Actually, what I was thinking is if Michelle and I are going to be doing our own thing, there's no reason we have to do that on the weekend when there are various things I would perhaps rather be doing. So Michelle and I could meet, Thursday as far as I'm concerned, because the homework I'm going to be doing.
Okay.
And then Monday, what I want to be doing is somewhat weather dependent on Monday. There's an outdoor class of exercise that I really like to do from 11:45 till 12:45. So no, that 11 isn't great for me. And maybe there's not a lot of difference for people if we met at 1. Does 1 meet work for you guys on Monday?
Yep.
So let's do it on
I'm pretty open on Monday.
Okay, let's do Monday at 1.
Okay. And Michelle, will you send a Zoom, Michelle?
Yes. So
Okay.
a Zoom for the three of us, Monday at 1.
Good.
Yep. And then Ellen, what time? And you wanted to meet on Thursday?
You know what? I think on Thursday afternoon. Does that work for you?
Yes. Thursday morning's not good for me, but.
So we say 3 o'clock?
Sure.
Sure.
Thursday
Let's
at
do
3.
that. And will you set up a meeting for us, although if it's just 2 of us?
I will.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right.
You guys are working harder than the town board.
Yeah.
I don't believe that, but yes.
No, I don't know. I have no idea. It sounds like you're working much harder. And then I thought I'll just send out a summary of what what I thought we just decided, but I'll probably do it tomorrow.
Wonderful.
Okay. So the three of us.
Great, thanks.
Barbara, are you still in your job?
What's that?
Are you still in your job?
No, I'm done. I'm done as dean, but
Yay!
I'm in Lakeside, Michigan now. So.
Oh, really? Cool.
It's
Lucky
fun.
girl.
Thank
You did a lot of yeoman service for all of us.
Indeed.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Great group.
Okay.
Everybody, appreciate it.
Well, anyway, I won't send anything out till tomorrow because it's kind of
fine.
getting towards my bedtime. So
See you.
Sounds
you.
good. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.